So warring states, you're going to see a lot of these kind of sophisticated animal motifs. People say this is in a way stimulated by contact with nomadic tribes. Like for example, people in Yan and Zhao, they were way in the north during the Shang dynasty or Shang or Hanzhou dynasty. They were contacting nomads from Central Asia or from the north. So because of these, you are going to have a little bit more motifs, dragons or beasts. And this is the explanation. So cultural exchange was very much encouraged. So ancient Chinese people were trading with people as far as in Caspian Ocean or the territories of Hellenistic Empire. So current Iran, Afghanistan, Scythian people in those areas, and they were nomads, but they had access to Greek artisans. So a little bit more realistic animal motifs were introduced. The one you are looking here, these are variations of these animal motifs. So Chinese people created their own version of animal motif, golden dogs or tiger. And Chinese people always to create a little bit more formulaic decoration, so that there are a lot of cloud motif. Do you see the legs or patterns over here? They call it genuine, like a culling clouds. Those are coming from these type of Scythian art. Chinese art is also influenced by outside stimulations as well. During Eastern Zhou period, like a warring states period, we start to have painting on silk. Because it's essentially BCE, Common Era, more than 2,300 years ago, painting on perishable surface disappeared in many cases. But somehow in the Hunan province, this town called Changsha is very dry. So some funerary objects survived. So you are going to see this woman with a crane or phoenix, and then a man riding the dragon. So both of them, they had a slight pigment, like a white. Overall, it's discolored. So I'm going to show you a line drawing. They are both made on silk. So if you see the line drawing, a woman is accompanied by snake or a dragon and phoenix. So scholars interpret this lady as a dead woman, a deceased woman, and probably this funerary banner was covering her coffin. Families of this woman wish that her soul is carried by phoenix or protected by dragon and phoenix and reside in peaceful and safe place. The woman is depicted in a strict profile. There are a lot of comments on her dress. I teach history of East Asian costumes. So in that class, we talk a lot about like her headdress, headwear, and then the garment. But one thing I want to introduce is from this period, we have a embroidered quilt on silk. And that pattern is a sort of a continuous floral pattern. Her sleeves indicate that she could have this type of luxurious embroidered or brocaded jacket, a woman from a noble family. In man's case, he had a canopy and he has a dragon. He is actually holding a leash, riding the dragon so that he can travel the underworld comfortably. And then fish refers to the underworld. Now, if we come to the Qin dynasty, the most important monument is Qin Shi Huangdi's tomb. So these are terracotta warriors of Qin Shi Huangdi. Qin Shi Huangdi is an amazing warrior and politician. He was considered really harsh and cruel ruler, and that's why his dynasty lasted very short, for about 14 years. But he made a lot of changes using his tyrannical policies. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, he came out with the standardization of the written languages. And then he burnt many classic books because he didn't believe in consensus or change of opinions. He established cultural unity, came up with the concept of men of a Han ethnic group. And then this is the first empire, like it's an empire ruled by a sole emperor. So during his lifetime, he started a colossal tomb project. This was recorded and people read about it, but they didn't know that it ever existed in reality. So this was again discovered in the late 20th century by a farmer outside Xi'an. And then when they started excavation, they realized that it is really massive scale as told by historians. Terracotta warriors, what is it made of? These are clay figurines or clay figures. So terracotta refers to like a red clay, baked clay figures as well as vessels. In our real world, you see the plant pots, the red plant pots. Those are usually made of terracotta. It's not glazed. This had a mold. I will show you some slides, and then they held some weapons, this kind of weapons. So you can insert metal weapons into these clay figures. And Qin Shi Huangdi is the one who started to build the Great Wall. And one of the reasons that his empire collapsed, is because people were complaining a lot about harsh labor that they provided to build the Great Wall. The idea is by building the wall, China can protect itself from nomadic tribes. So that's the idea. It started in Qin Shi Huangdi's reign. So it has horses for cavalrymen, or they put the arrows for kneeling archer. But these are all created with the mold. Do you see the mold here? It is pretty efficient production. Again, it's a technological innovation. You can make a body parts. If you have a mold like this, you can make hundreds of them quickly, right? Face also has several types, so you can insert the face separately and then insert it. And originally everything was painted, but when they started excavation, once the air touched the surface of it, these coloring pigments disappeared. So how many of them? 6,000 figures. And then during the excavation, they only excavated about 1,000. They didn't excavate all of them. Why? Because they didn't want to expose all of them. They didn't have enough space to hold that 6,000 figures. So they created an archaeological park for tourists. So they also made replicas of it, so that originals are in the museums. And then people who are visiting this pit or excavation sites, they will see the replicas of it. Confucianism is very important. I want you to read more about it. If you see the blackboard, lecture 2, you are going to have some supplementary reading about Confucianism. Based on Confucianism, government officials and scholars, they should be educated. They don't rule the country by their emotion or by terrorizing people. They have to rule the country based on proper relationship between human beings. So that proper relationship comes from the education. So only those who are well educated, they can serve the government. How do you then select officials? There is a statewide exam. And who started it? During the Han Dynasty, Han Wudi and other emperors started this nationwide state test. In this social class, literary or scholars were considered noble and civic leaders. Merchants, artisans, technicians, and craftsmen, these people belonged to the next social group. They are not very well educated, but they are excellent in their skills. The largest number of people or population, they are farmers. I mean, you can say farmers, fishermen, or people who produce. If you don't serve the government, or if you don't pass the state exam, you just live as farmers. This is the fundamental supporter of the dynasties. Of course, there were slaves. There were slaves. And then in these Confucian ideas, any gentleman, educated gentleman, they should master poetry, calligraphy, and painting, and they are together. So this is the idea of a gentleman who can compose a poetry, then and transfer his poems into beautifully written words, calligraphy, and then if they want, they can also have a little bit of a painting that go with it. So all of them are based on the ink and brush. So during the Han Dynasty,